The chandeliers above the ballroom glittered like frozen rain, their light bouncing off a sea of champagne glasses and sequined gowns. The orchestra swelled as my sister Lila glided through the crowd in her silk wedding dress, her laughter bright enough to silence every other sound. 200 guests turned toward the stage when my father took the microphone, his voice thick with pride and champagne. "We're so proud of our only daughter," he said, and the room erupted in applause. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. But when my mother clasped his arm and nodded, smiling toward Lila, I felt the words pierce straight through my chest. I stood frozen among strangers, holding a half-empty flute, the bubbles going flat in my trembling hand. My mother's gaze swept over me once, quick and careful, before she turned away. I could hear the laughter, the cheers, the clinking of glasses, all muffled as though I were underwater. I wanted to vanish before the tears reached my throat. So I set the glass down, walked out of the ballroom, and left the applause behind me. No one followed. No one called my name. That was the moment I knew I had ceased to exist in my own family. Outside, the night air was colder than I expected, sharp with sea salt from the Maine coast. The resort stood on a bluff above the Atlantic, the kind of postcard place people booked a year in advance for destination weddings. I walked down the long stone path toward the beach heels, sinking into the gravel, every step echoing inside me. The fireworks hadn't started yet, but I could already hear the crowd counting down to midnight inside the hall. Through the ballroom windows, the lights blurred into golden orbs. My sister twirled under the chandeliers, her veil glinting like a halo. My mother raised her glass high, her perfect hostess smile intact. For a family built on appearances, it was the perfect picture. Perfect except for the missing daughter outside in the dark. I kicked off my shoes when I reached the sand, the cold biting into my toes. The tide was low waves folding gently over themselves like they were whispering secrets. I wrapped my arms around my body, trying to breathe, but the weight in my chest only grew heavier. I thought about the years I'd driven back and forth from Boston every holiday, the gifts I'd bought, the flowers I'd sent, the endless effort to belong. I thought about how many times my mother had called me too serious, too practical, not like Lila who brings light into a room. Maybe they had finally decided that practicality wasn't the kind of daughter worth keeping. When I turned back toward the resort, the fireworks began, explosions of gold and white lighting up the sky above the cliff. Cheers rose from the crowd, the sound carrying across the water like celebration and mockery all at once. I whispered Happy New Year to no one and started walking toward the parking lot, my bare feet leaving uneven prints behind me. In the car, I sat for a long time before starting the engine. My phone kept buzzing, texts from coworkers wishing me a Happy New Year, a few from friends in Boston asking how the wedding was going. I couldn't bring myself to answer any of them. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Mascara streaked down my cheeks, hair falling loose from its bun. I didn't look like a sister or a daughter. I looked like a guest who had stayed too long at someone else's celebration. When I finally turned the key, the radio came on with a burst of static, then a soft piano melody. I drove down the coastal road, the beams of my headlights slicing through the mist. I replayed the moment again and again, my father's voice, my mother's face, the sound of applause swallowing my existence. Every detail felt rehearsed. Even the way they stood together on that stage, a united front. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a declaration. And it worked. No one in that room questioned them. They had erased me so completely that even I was starting to fade. I stopped at a lookout point halfway to town. Below, the ocean spread out like a black mirror, reflecting the last sparks of fireworks from the resort. I leaned against the car, closed my eyes, and tried to remember the last time my parents had said they were proud of me. I couldn't. Maybe when I got my MBA. Maybe when I bought my apartment downtown. But pride in my family always came with conditions. They loved results, not the person who delivered them. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a text, it was an email notification. The subject line caught my eye, finalized transfer. Property title 42 Lighthouse Road. It was from Camden Bank, the one my parents used for everything. My name was on the CC line, probably out of habit, since I used to handle their online payments years ago. I tapped it open without thinking, and the words blurred under the glow of the dashboard. Beneficiary, Lila Grant Lawrence. Effective January 1. My breath caught. Lighthouse Road. That was the house we grew up in, the one my parents swore would be ours equally someday. The house where my father taught me how to sandwood in the garage, where my mother hosted Thanksgiving dinners that always ended with her criticizing the gravy. It wasn't just a building. It was the symbol of everything we had endured together. And now it belonged entirely to Lila. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the screen while the engine idled. I scrolled down and saw attached documents, legal signed, notarized. I knew enough from my own work in corporate finance to recognize a deed transfer. There was my mother's signature, my father's, and Lila's. Mine, of course, was nowhere. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it. It wasn't just emotional erasure. It was legal, permanent. The irony was cruel. I had been the one who made the monthly transfers to help pay off that house years ago when Dad's business struggled. I'd sent thousands over the years, never a complaint, never a missed payment, because I thought family meant loyalty. And now the house was a wedding gift to the sister who'd never lifted a finger to earn it. A hollow laugh slipped from my lips. It sounded foreign in the quiet car. I closed the email, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, and rested my head on the steering wheel. Somewhere far behind me, fireworks still cracked across the sky, celebrating a new year, a new marriage, a new life that didn't include me. I thought of going back, walking into that ballroom, grabbing the microphone and saying, "Actually, there are 2 daughters." But then I pictured my mother's composed smile, my father's polite embarrassment, Lila's perfect shock. They would twist it, dismiss it, turn my pain into more drama to be managed. That was the family pattern: erase the truth, polish the story. So instead, I sat there and let the silence settle. I wasn't sure if the tears on my cheeks were grief or fury. Maybe both. But beneath the heartbreak, something steadier began to take root, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. If they could erase me once, they'd do it again. Unless I did something first. I started the car, headlights flaring against the fog. The road back to Boston was empty, the world between years quiet and still. As I drove, I kept seeing that email subject line glowing in my mind like a promise and a warning. At a red light on the edge of town, I finally whispered it aloud. Finalized transfer. The words felt final, but not for me. For them. They had no idea what they just set in motion. That night, as I pulled into my apartment garage, the clock on the dashboard clicked over to 1203. New Year's Day. I shut off the engine and sat in the dark, the smell of salt still clinging to my hair and dress. The city was silent except for the faint echo of fireworks in the distance. I opened my phone one last time and stared at the email again, zooming in on the date, the signatures, the proof of betrayal. I exhaled, slowly wiped my face, and whispered to myself, "Happy New Year, Lila." Then I added, quieter but sharper, "You can keep the house. I'll keep the truth." I didn't know yet what that meant, or how far I'd go to prove it. But as the new year began, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being the invisible daughter. The morning after the wedding felt like waking up inside someone else's life. The dress I'd worn still hung on the back of a chair, wrinkled, reeking of salt and champagne. I made coffee but couldn't drink it. Every sip brought back my father's voice echoing over the microphone, "Our only daughter." The words had burned themselves into my skin. I kept expecting my phone to ring for someone, anyone from that family, to call and say it was a misunderstanding. But no one did. By noon, I gave up waiting. I opened my laptop and found the email again, staring at the words until they stopped looking real. The property transfer had gone through the day before the wedding. It hadn't been impulsive, it had been planned. I knew that because the notary's seal was dated December 29th. They'd known exactly what they were doing. They'd toasted with champagne while handing over the house I'd helped pay for. I opened the files again, combing through every line of legal jargon. There were payment records, signatures, bank routing numbers. I recognized my father's careful penmanship, the same looping R he used to sign my birthday cards. Beside his signature was my mother's perfect cursive Evelyn Grant, and beneath it, Lila's new name, Lila Grant Lawrence. The deed now listed her as the sole owner of 42 Lighthouse Road. There wasn't even a mention of me. My hands shook as I scrolled through the fine print. Executed and recorded, it said. My father had taught me that phrase years ago when I helped him file business contracts. Once it's executed, he'd said it's done. No going back. He'd smiled proudly when I got it right. Now that same lesson mocked me. I didn't remember leaving my apartment, only the next moment, standing in the parking garage, car keys biting into my palm. The drive to Camden took 3 hours, most of it along Route 1, with the ocean flickering in and out beside me. Every mile I drove, my anger tightened into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to find out what else they'd hidden. By the time I reached Lighthouse Road, the sky had turned the color of pewter. The old house stood quiet. The same white clapboard siding and green shutters I'd grown up staring at from the back seat of my dad's truck. It looked smaller than I remembered, almost fragile. There was a just married sign still hanging on the front porch railing, tattered by the wind. 2 champagne flutes sat forgotten on the steps. I parked across the street and sat for a minute, gripping the steering wheel. I hadn't been here since Thanksgiving. My mother had spent that entire weekend talking about Lila's wedding, every sentence a soft criticism disguised as concern. You'll come alone again, Maddie. No date. You know your sister was worried you might feel left out. I'd brushed it off, not realizing how literal that prophecy would become. The front door opened before I could knock. My father stood there wearing his plaid robe, hair sticking up. He looked older than I remembered, his face slack with surprise. Madeline, what are you doing here? I held up my phone with the email pulled open. You want to explain this? He blinked, confused for a second, then sighed. Let's not do this here, honey. Come in. Your mother's resting. Inside the house smelled of lemon cleaner and wilted flowers. Half-empty champagne bottles lined the counter. The dining room table was still covered with gift bags and tissue paper. I remembered wrapping paper fights, birthday cakes, the way Lila used to hide under that table when Mom got angry. Now it all looked staged, like a museum of memories. Dad gestured toward the living room. Sit down. I'll make coffee. I don't want coffee. I want to know why you transferred the house to Lila. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my eyes. It's complicated. It looks simple to me, I said. You gave away the only thing left that tied this family together. He sat across from me, shoulders sagging. Lila's got 2 kids now, Maddie. She needs stability. You're fine on your own. You've always been fine. Fine, I repeated, laughing once a hollow sound. That's what you call it, paying your mortgage for 5 years while you pretend everything's okay? He looked startled. You didn't have to. But I did. I cut in. Because you asked. Because you said family helps family. His silence was answer enough. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Then my mother's voice, calm and polished as ever. What's all this noise? She appeared in the doorway, still immaculate in her silk robe, hair brushed, lipstick fresh. Madeline, she said, as though I were a surprise visitor, not her daughter confronting betrayal. You should have called first. I figured you might hang up, she sighed. You're upset, I understand. But really, darling, this isn't as dramatic as you think. Not dramatic. My voice rose. You announced at a wedding that you had 1 daughter, and then legally erased me from the house I helped pay for. What word would you use? Her eyes hardened. We didn't erase you. You're doing well. You have your career, your independence. Lila needed a home, and I didn't. You don't have children. You don't have responsibilities. That was the line that broke me. You think I don't have responsibilities? I've been your safety net for 8 years, Dad stood suddenly. Enough. We're not turning this into a shouting match. I looked between them, two people who had once been my compass, now strangers wearing familiar faces. You didn't even tell me. You didn't give me a chance to understand or object or, God forbid, agree. Mom's expression softened slightly, though I could tell it was calculated. Madeline, honey, we just wanted peace. Families change. We did what we thought was best. For whom, I asked, quietly. For the family, or for your reputation? The question hung in the air. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father turned toward the window. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the old mantel clock. Then Mom said softly, "You're too emotional about these things. Always have been." I almost laughed again. "No, Mom, I'm just done pretending," she frowned. "Pretending what? That this is a family." I grabbed my bag and walked to the door. My father said my name once, but I didn't look back. Outside the air was colder, sharper. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't breathe inside that house another second. I ended up at the old workshop behind the garage, the place where Dad used to build furniture for extra money. The lights were off, but the faint smell of sawdust still lingered. On the workbench sat one of his unfinished projects, a chair missing its seat. I ran my fingers along the frame, tracing the familiar grooves. A half-empty jar of nails sat nearby, a reminder of every Saturday we spent here, when I was 10 learning how to hold a hammer without hitting my thumb. I remembered him telling me, if you want something to last, you have to build it strong, even if no one sees the work inside. I wondered if he ever realized how much that advice applied to me. When I came back around the front, a silver SUV was pulling into the driveway. Lila stepped out, still glowing with the aftertaste of her wedding. Her dress had been replaced by a cream sweater, her hair tied up, diamond ring catching the light. "Maddie," she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" I crossed my arms. "Visiting what used to be my home." Her smile faltered. "Oh, you heard." I read. She shifted uncomfortably. "Mom said you might take it the wrong way." "There's a right way to steal from your sister Maddie, please. It's not like that. They wanted to make sure the kids had a stable place. You're always so busy, you don't even live here." Her words hit the same nerve my mother had pressed earlier. Independence used as justification for erasure. I stared at her, this woman who shared my face, my history, but not my guilt. "You could have told me." She looked down. "I didn't know how. You say that a lot when it's convenient." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't ask for this." I nodded. "No, but you didn't refuse it either." She turned away, and for a second I almost softened. But then I remembered the email, the signatures, the laughter echoing as they toasted their only daughter. Compassion and anger twisted together inside me until they were indistinguishable. I walked back to my car, the gravel crunching beneath my heels. Lila called after me, voice trembling, "Maddie, wait, I didn't." When I reached the end of the driveway, I looked back one last time. The house glowed warm behind me, golden in the afternoon light. Beautiful, hollow, borrowed. As I slid behind the wheel, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number: "We need to talk. I have information about your parents' financial transfers." DS. My heart skipped. I didn't recognize the initials, but something about the tone was deliberate, careful. For the first time since the wedding, I smiled, not because I was happy, but because the silence was finally cracking. I typed back one word. When the reply came almost instantly: "Tomorrow morning. I'll bring proof." I leaned back against the seat, eyes on the house at the top of the hill. Maybe the fireworks hadn't ended after all, they were just moving underground. The next morning, the fog over Boston clung low to the river like a secret refusing to lift. I sat in a coffee shop near South Station, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. The message from the night before still glowed on my phone screen: "I'll bring proof." The initials DS had become an obsession overnight. I'd barely slept, running through every possibility: someone from the bank, a lawyer, maybe even a friend of my parents. Whoever it was, they knew something I didn't. and that was enough to keep me there watching the door like I was waiting for a ghost. At 9:03, the door chimed. A man in his late 30s stepped inside, tall, wearing a dark coat and the kind of tired confidence that comes from long hours in courtrooms. He scanned the room, saw me, and walked over. "Madeline Grant?" he asked. His voice was calm but cautious. "Yes," I said. "You must be D.S. David Sullivan," he replied, sitting across from me. "I'm an attorney. I used to handle corporate fraud cases for Camden Bank before I opened my own firm. We've actually crossed paths before years ago when your father refinanced the house. I was in-house counsel then." The name clicked faintly in my mind. I remembered a polite man shaking hands with my father in our living room while my mother served coffee in her favorite china cups. That was before the debts, before everything started slipping. David set a small folder on the table between us. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said quietly. "But after what I saw in the property transfer last week, I couldn't look the other way. There are inconsistencies, big ones." I leaned in. "What kind of inconsistencies?" He flipped open the folder. Inside were copies of documents, familiar ones. The deed transfer, a notarized statement, my parents' signatures, and then another form I hadn't seen before titled Mortgage Satisfaction Statement. David pointed to a section near the bottom. "See this line? It says the loan was paid off entirely last July." "That's impossible," I said. "They were still making payments in November. I transferred the money myself." He nodded. "Exactly. The mortgage wasn't paid off with family funds. It was cleared using a short-term bridge loan taken out in your father's name and co-signed by your sister." I stared at him. "Lila co-signed. But she didn't even live in that house." "She claimed she did," he said, pulling another document. "The loan application lists her as a resident and contributor to household income. She listed her new husband's company as a financial guarantor." My pulse pounded in my ears. "You're saying they lied on official documents?" "I'm saying they orchestrated a transaction that looks to any trained eye like a deliberate scheme to remove you from the picture." I sat back, letting his words sink in. "Why would they do that?" He hesitated, studying me. "You've been the financial safety net for that family for years, haven't you?" I didn't answer, but my silence told him everything. "I saw the transfers," he continued. "Automatic payments from your account, utilities, mortgage, emergency fund. You weren't just helping them, you were funding them. Without your support, they would have defaulted years ago." The weight of it pressed down on me like an old bruise. I'd always told myself it was love, obligation, duty. I'd never once called it what it really was: dependence. David slid another paper toward me, a printout of a bank ledger. "This line here," he said, tapping a transaction, $180,000. A home equity loan taken out 3 months before the wedding. The repayments line up perfectly with your deposits. I looked at the page, disbelief turning to anger. So my money wasn't paying down their mortgage, it was paying off a new loan. "Yes," he said. "A loan they used as collateral for the business merger between Grant Interiors and Lawrence Holdings." I froze. "Grant Interiors, my father's company." He nodded again. "It's been restructured under the new entity Lawrence and Grant Design. According to state filings, your parents now hold only 40% of the company. 60% belongs to the Lawrences." The words hit like a punch. They sold it, technically they merged. But the effect is the same. They relinquished control, and they used funds from your contributions to make it happen. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I saw flashes of my childhood in that workshop behind the house, my father teaching me to sand a cabinet, my mother sweeping sawdust from the floor while humming Sinatra. That business wasn't just a paycheck, it was our family's identity. And now it was gone, traded away in a merger I hadn't even been told about. David watched me carefully. "I know this is a lot to process," he said. "But there's more." I looked up, bracing myself. "What else?" He pulled out one final sheet, an email printed on letterhead from a law firm in Portland. "This was sent from your mother to an attorney named Victor Langley. It discusses asset protection strategies, specifically transferring property ownership to prevent potential creditor claims from family members. Family members, I repeated slowly. Meaning me. Yes. I stared at the words until they blurred. Potential creditor claims. I'd always thought my mother's obsession with image was just vanity, but this wasn't vanity, it was strategy. David closed the folder gently. I can't tell you what to do, Miss Grant. But if you want to protect yourself, you need to act fast. Once these transfers are finalized through the corporate registry, undoing them becomes almost impossible. I exhaled shakily. What would that look like? I can file a preliminary injunction to freeze any assets tied to your name or your money. You'll need documentation of every transfer you've made to your parents' accounts, every loan, every payment. Do you have records? Yes, I said automatically. 8 years' worth. He smiled faintly, though there was no amusement in it. Good. That's the first time I've seen being overly organized work in someone's favor. A small, unsteady laugh escaped me. I always thought it was just another way of keeping control. Sometimes control is survival, he said quietly. We sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe fading behind us. I thought about my parents sitting in that big house, the same one I'd kept afloat for years, celebrating a wedding that doubled as a business transaction. I thought about Lila signing documents she probably didn't even read, smiling for photos while the ink dried on my exclusion. What happens if I do nothing? I asked. He looked at me carefully. They'll move on without you. The company, the property, the family estate, it'll all pass to your sister's name. And you'll still be the one who paid for it. The sentence landed like truth I already knew but had refused to name. I nodded slowly. File it. He studied my face. You're sure? I'm sure, I said. If they wanted to make me invisible, they're about to regret how well I learned to watch. David nodded, once stood, and extended his hand. Then we'll start today. I'll send you the paperwork. When he left, I sat there a long time staring at the folder. The fog outside had lifted slightly, sunlight filtering through the glass. People walked by laughing, carrying takeout cups, their lives untouched by betrayal. I envied their ignorance. By the time I got back to my apartment, the numbness had hardened into resolve. I opened my laptop, pulled up my banking app, and began scrolling through years of transfers. $2, $200 a month to my parents. $1, $800 to Lila. Occasionally more for emergencies. I created a spreadsheet labeling every payment. When I reached the total, my stomach twisted. $352,000. I closed the computer and looked around my apartment, the framed photos, the clean countertops, the quiet order of a life I'd built alone. For the first time, it all looked sterile. I'd spent years trying to earn my family's approval, but all I'd bought was distance. That night, as I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, I replayed my father's voice in my head. We're so proud of our only daughter. The words no longer stung the same way. They sounded like a confession, a slip of the mask. I stared out over the city lights and whispered to myself, let them be proud. Then I opened my phone, found David's number, and texted, send me everything you have on Grant Interiors. Tomorrow I'm going to Camden. The reply came a minute later. Understood. Brace yourself, Madeline. What you'll find might change everything. I smiled into the dark. Good, I said aloud. That's the point. Camden was gray when I arrived, the kind of gray that seeps into your bones. The harbor sat still, boats tethered to the docks like they'd given up on movement. I parked outside Grant Interiors, the place that had once been my father's pride, and stared at the new sign bolted over the door, Lawrence and Grant Home Design. The paint was fresh, the letters shiny, as if someone wanted the world to forget what used to be there. I sat in the car for a full minute before stepping out, breathing in the familiar scent of cedar and sea air. For a second, I thought about turning around, pretending none of this mattered. But I wasn't built for pretending anymore. Inside, the bell above the door jingled. The showroom smelled like lemon polish and varnish. The walls gleamed with catalog-perfect furniture, sleek tables, glass fixtures, modern lighting that looked nothing like the pieces Dad used to make. A young woman behind the counter looked up from her computer, startled. "Hi there. Can I help you?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe. I used to work here." "Oh, you must be Mrs. Lawrence's sister," she said brightly. She was in earlier checking on the new shipment. The words hit like a slap. I nodded slowly. "That's right," I said, my voice tight. "I'm the other daughter." Her smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. "Would you like to speak to Mr. Grant? He's in the back office." I followed her past the display tables to my father's old office. The door was half open, and I could hear the clack of a keyboard. The smell of coffee and wood polish made my chest ache with memories. Saturday mornings spent here sanding wood, counting nails, watching Dad's sketch designs on yellow notepads. I knocked once and stepped inside. He looked up from the computer screen, startled, then tried to compose himself. "Madeline," he said slowly, "what are you doing here?" "Getting answers," he sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I suppose David Sullivan's been in touch. So you know him." "Everyone in Camden knows David," he said. "He likes to dig into people's business." "He's a lawyer," I said evenly. "That's literally his job." Dad stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "You shouldn't have gotten him involved. This is family business." "Family business," I laughed softly. "That's rich, considering half this company now belongs to the Lawrences." His shoulders stiffened. "It's a partnership. It saved us. It sold us," I corrected. "And you used my money to do it." He turned, then face red. "Don't start with that tone, Madeline. You chose to help. No one forced you." "Right," I said quietly. "I just kept paying and paying because you let me believe it mattered." He ran a hand through his graying hair, suddenly looking older than I'd ever seen him. "You think I wanted this? I built this business from nothing. But after the layoffs, after the debts, you weren't here. You didn't see how desperate things got." "I sent money," I said. "Every month. And that kept us afloat," he said bitterly. "But it wasn't enough to rebuild. Adam offered to invest, and your mother thought it was time to bring in new energy." "New energy?" I repeated, tasting the words like ash. "You mean new owners?" He turned away again, staring out the window toward the street. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." The office door opened behind us. My mother stood there, crisp and composed in a navy blazer, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "I told you this would happen," she said to my father, before looking at me. "You never could leave well enough alone." I met her gaze without blinking. "I'm not here for peace, Mom. I'm here for the truth." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You've always made everything sound so dramatic. Nothing's changed, Maddie. The business still carries our name. Your father still works here. Lila's helping modernize it. We're moving forward." "You moved forward without me," I said. "You forged signatures. You transferred property. You hid loans." Her face hardened. "Watch your tone." "You erased me," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "At the wedding, in the house, in this company. Don't tell me it's just business." Dad muttered something under his breath, but Mom stepped closer. "We did what was necessary to protect what's left of this family. Protect it from what, me? From failure," she snapped. "From your father's mistakes. From your endless criticism." I laughed softly. "Criticism. That's what you call accountability. Now," she crossed her arms, "you think you know everything because you have a degree and a job in the city. But families don't survive on pride, Madeline. They survive on sacrifice. I sacrificed 8 years of paychecks for you," I said. "You didn't survive. You just sold the pieces of your conscience." Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she didn't have a rehearsed answer. Behind us, the office door creaked again. Lila's voice floated in hesitant. "What's going on?" I turned. She stood there, clutching her phone, eyes darting between us. "Mom, I could hear you from the front." Mom exhaled sharply. "It's fine, sweetheart. Your sister's just upset." Lila looked at me, her brow furrowing. About what? I stepped forward, holding up one of David's documents. About this. The home equity loan you co-signed. The one where you claimed to live in this house. Her mouth fell open. I didn't know it was a big deal. Mom said it was just paperwork. Paperwork? My voice broke into a laugh. You signed away everything and didn't even bother to ask what it meant. Lila's face flushed. I was just trying to help. You helped yourself, I said. You got a house, a company, and a family that applauded you for existing. What did I get? Her lips trembled. Don't make me the villain, Maddie. Then stop acting like one, I said quietly. The silence after that was sharp. My father sat heavily at his desk, staring at his hands. My mother looked like she might speak, then thought better of it. Finally, she said, her voice cold, You always did have a talent for twisting things. You want to play the victim now, fine. But don't expect sympathy when this all falls apart. I looked at her. Truly looked at the woman who had spent her whole life building the perfect image, polishing every corner of her world until it gleamed with denial. It already fell apart, I said softly. You just haven't noticed yet. I turned and walked out. Outside, the air hit my face like a slap. I didn't realize I was shaking until I reached the car. My phone buzzed. It was David. I answered without thinking. How bad was it? He asked. Worse, I said. They're not even denying it. He was quiet for a beat. Then we moved forward. I found something else. Meet me tonight. What is it? A name, he said. Victor Langley, the attorney who notarized the deed. He's not exactly clean. I watched the sign above the building shimmer in the weak afternoon light. Lawrence and Grant. The words felt foreign, like graffiti sprayed over my childhood. Where do we meet? I asked. The diner off Route 1, he said. 8 o'clock. Fine, I said, then paused. David, yeah. Make sure you bring proof. I'm done with stories. When I hung up, I looked one last time at the showroom window. Inside, Lila stood near the counter, her hands pressed against her chest, eyes wide and red. For a flicker of a second, I almost pitied her. Then I remembered the email, the house deed, the applause. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away. As I drove down the hill, the wind picked up, scattering a few dried leaves across the road. The ocean stretched out beyond the trees, gray and endless. I thought of my father's words, families don't survive on pride. Maybe he was right. Maybe they survive on deceit instead. But I wasn't part of that survival anymore. By the time I reached the main road, my anger had cooled into something clearer, colder. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. They'd built their little empire on my silence. Now I was going to see what happened when silence stopped serving them. The diner off Route 1 was half empty when I got there. Neon light flickered against the rain-streaked windows, turning the puddles outside into ribbons of red and blue. David was already in a booth at the back, a folder open beside his coffee. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. But there was a sharpness in his eyes that told me he'd found something worth losing sleep over. You came, he said when I slid into the booth. I said I would, I replied. What did you find? He pushed the folder toward me. Victor Langley, the notary who certified your parents' signatures. He's been under quiet investigation for falsifying documents in at least 3 other property transfers. Same handwriting, same forged signatures, same payout pattern. My heart thudded. A payout, he nodded. $15,000 deposited into his account the day after the Lighthouse Road transfer. Source, Lawrence Holdings. The name rolled through my head like static. Adams Company. Exactly, David said. Your brother-in-law's firm paid the notary. That's fraud, plain and simple. I stared at the printed bank statement, the numbers crisp and undeniable. $15,000. A betrayal measured in digits. So they bribed him to make it legal. They bribed him to make it invisible, he corrected. I leaned back, trying to steady my breathing. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the silence between us. How do you prove something like that? You don't have to prove it alone, he said. Langley's already agreed to meet. He's scared. He wants to make a deal before this goes public. When David checked his watch, tomorrow morning. His office in Portland. If what he says is true, we'll have everything we need. I nodded slowly, staring at the folder as if it might catch fire. And if he's lying, then we keep digging, David said. But my gut says he's ready to talk. I took a sip of the coffee he'd ordered for me. It was bitter and burnt, but I needed something to anchor myself. What happens after we get the proof? Then we go to the State Fraud Division, he said. And you file an injunction to freeze all assets tied to that transaction. The company, the house, everything. The idea felt unreal, too heavy, and too simple at once. You make it sound like justice is a straight line. It never is, he said, but sometimes you can bend it enough to point the right way. The rain grew heavier, hammering against the glass. I glanced out at the dark road, the glow of taillights disappearing into the mist. They'll never see this coming, I whispered. They will, David said, and when they do, they'll try to paint you as ungrateful, as cold. They'll say you're destroying the family for money. They already erased me, I said. I'm just making it official. He didn't argue. He just looked at me with that steady lawyer's calm. Then let's make sure when you hit back you don't miss. I drove home through the storm, the wipers struggling against the sheets of rain. Every flash of lightning illuminated pieces of the past. I'd been trying to forget Mom at the kitchen table, balancing bills, Dad sanding wood in the garage, Lila laughing in the living room while I worked late in my old bedroom trying to pay for everything. I had told myself it was love. Maybe it was. But love wasn't supposed to feel like debt. When I got back to my apartment, the city was quiet, washed clean by the storm. I peeled off my coat and collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. The folder David had given me sat on the coffee table closed, but pulsing with its own kind of energy. I stared at it until the numbers blurred together. 15,000. 180,000. 352,000. Betrayal was easy to quantify when you had the receipts. Around midnight, I opened my laptop. I wanted to see the faces of the people who had turned me into a stranger in my own family. On social media, Lila's wedding photos were everywhere, her glowing under fairy lights, Mom holding her hand, Dad smiling stiffly in the background. The caption read forever, grateful for family and new beginnings. I scrolled until I found the photo that made my stomach twist, a shot of the house on Lighthouse Road, the caption underneath our first home. A legacy continued. I slammed the laptop shut. Legacy. That word had been the cornerstone of every lecture my parents ever gave me. We built this for you girls, Dad used to say. It's your inheritance. I'd believed him. I'd believed all of it. The next morning I drove to Portland. Langley's office was in a narrow building near the waterfront, the kind of place you'd walk past without noticing. David was waiting inside, flipping through his notes. The notary arrived a few minutes later, a small, nervous man with thinning hair and an overcoat that looked too big for him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't want to do it, Langley said, voice trembling. They said it was harmless, just a formality. David leaned forward. You falsified a signature, Mr. Langley. That's not harmless. Langley nodded quickly. I know. They told me she agreed to the transfer, that she didn't want her name on the deed anymore. They even showed me an email. What email? I asked. He hesitated. From your mother. Evelyn Grant. She said you were too busy to come in person, but had approved the paperwork. That's a lie, I said, cold creeping into my voice. I figured that out later, Langley said, his voice cracking. But by then the money had been wired. 15,000. They called it a consulting fee. David took notes while Langley spoke, his pen scratching furiously against the pad. Do you still have copies of the correspondence? Yes, Langley said. Emails, payment receipts, even the delivery confirmation from the Lawrence's office. It's all on this drive. He slid a small USB stick across the desk. I just want to make it right. When we left his office, I stood on the sidewalk staring at the gray water of the bay. The air smelled like salt and metal, sharp enough to sting. David handed me the drive. This is it. This is the nail in their coffin. I thought I'd feel relieved, I said quietly. But all I feel is tired. That's normal, he said. Justice always starts out looking like grief. That night I drove back to Camden again. I parked near the harbor and sat there engine running, watching the lights shimmer on the water. My reflection in the windshield looked older than I remembered. Stronger maybe, but lonelier too. I thought about calling them, about giving them a chance to explain, to apologize. But explanations were just another kind of manipulation, and apologies didn't rebuild trust. The next day I met David again to review the files from Langley's drive. There were dozens of emails between my mother, the Lawrences, and Langley, discussing timelines, payments, even how to manage potential emotional fallout. They had planned my exclusion down to the last detail. One message from my mother stood out: Madeline will understand eventually. She's practical. She knows family decisions aren't personal. I stared at the words until my eyes burned. Family decisions. That was what betrayal looked like when it wore polite clothing. David closed the laptop. This is enough to file the injunction. I can have it on the judge's desk by Monday. I nodded, barely hearing him. My mind was back at the wedding, the applause, the lights, the way my mother avoided my eyes. They'd built that entire night on a foundation of deceit. And I'd stood there applauding with everyone else, too blind to see it. When David left, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by silence. The city outside pulsed with life, but I felt detached from it all. I poured myself a glass of wine, lifted it toward the window, and whispered, "Here's to family. May they finally learn what they taught me: nothing lasts if it's built on lies." I drank, feeling the burn spread through me, steadying my hands. Then I opened my phone and texted David, "File it. Let's end this." As soon as I hit send, I felt something shift inside me, not rage, not relief, but resolve. The kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for people to change. Outside, thunder rolled across the harbor. Somewhere far off, a church bell chimed 6 times. I watched the reflection of lightning flicker across the glass and whispered to myself, "You wanted a fresh start, Mom. Let's see how you handle one that doesn't come with applause." The next morning, Camden was washed clean by a cold drizzle that left the street smelling like salt and metal. I parked in front of Grant Interiors just after 9. From the outside, it looked polished and thriving, the windows dressed with velvet curtains, the display pieces positioned to catch the light. But I knew better. Polished surfaces were my family's favorite disguise. Inside, everything gleamed too much. The walls, the furniture, the smell of lemon wax. Gone were the warm oak tables and hand-carved chairs my father once prided himself on. In their place were sterile pieces that screamed luxury but whispered nothing of craft. I walked past a display of marble coffee tables and into the back office, ignoring the nervous, "Can I help you?" from the girl at the front desk. Dad's office looked like it had been redecorated by someone who'd never known him. His collection of wood samples was gone, replaced by sleek metal frames and a shiny new desk. Family photos were missing too. The only picture left was of Lila and Adam, smiling in front of the newly renamed sign, Lawrence and Grant Home Design. The sight made my stomach twist. I opened a filing cabinet, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside were folders labeled with crisp new tabs, invoices, partnership agreements, payroll. I flipped through them until I found what I was looking for: the company's financial statements. Page after page told the same story. A massive cash injection, $180,000 from Harbor State Bank 3 months before the wedding. Payments from Lawrence Holdings logged as consulting services. Then, right below deposits labeled loan repayment. The handwriting on the old ledgers was my father's, but the new ones all typed. Clean, sterile, erased. I heard footsteps behind me and turned. A middle-aged woman in a cardigan stood at the door holding a cup of tea. Madeline. It took me a second to recognize her. Edith. She smiled faintly. "I was wondering when you'd come. I thought you might after everything." Edith Bowman had worked as my father's bookkeeper for nearly 20 years. She was like part of the wallpaper of my childhood, always in the background, humming softly as she balanced the books. She'd retired 2 years ago or so, I'd been told. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She shrugged. "Old habits die hard. I came by to drop off some of my old files, and then your mother called asking for my help reconciling the accounts. But when I saw what they'd done," her voice trailed off. "It didn't feel right." I gestured to the chair. "Sit. Tell me what you know." She closed the office door, lowering her voice. "The sale, what they're calling a merger, it wasn't exactly voluntary. The Lawrences offered to save the business after your father's debts caught up. Your mother said it was a chance to modernize. But the paperwork—" Edith shook her head. "It shifted ownership. 60% Lawrence, 40% Grant, which means I said they don't control the company anymore." She nodded. "Your father didn't seem to realize that at first. But when I asked about it, your mother told me not to worry. She said the family would stay protected as long as the Lawrences stayed happy." I could hear the bitterness in my own laugh. "Sounds familiar." Edith hesitated, then reached into her purse. "I shouldn't show you this," she said, "but you deserve to see it." She slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a copy of a bank transfer, $50,000 from the business account to an account under Lila's name dated 1 week before the wedding. The memo line read bonus divided by personal expense. My chest tightened. "They gave her money from the company." Edith nodded. "Your mother called it a wedding bonus. Your father signed it." I stared at the document, my pulse hammering. "And she knew." "Of course she knew," Edith said softly. "Evelyn knows everything." I leaned back in the chair, staring up at the ceiling. "They didn't just steal my inheritance," I said. "They used my money to build her future." Edith placed a hand on my shoulder. "You can fix this, you know. But it's going to get ugly." "It already is," I said. By the time I left, the drizzle had turned to steady rain. I walked around the back of the building to the workshop, the one Dad had always claimed would never change. He was there, standing by the window, sanding a piece of wood like he used to. He looked up when I walked in. "You again?" he said quietly. "What now?" I dropped the folder on his workbench. "This. 50,000 to Lila, out of the company's account." He didn't look surprised. "She's family. So am I." He flinched just slightly. "You don't understand how things work, Maddie. When you have children, you'll see." "I have parents," I said. "That's enough experience." His jaw tightened. "Your mother did what she thought was best." "No, she did what made her look best." He turned away, rubbing his temples. "You don't know the pressure we were under." "Then tell me," I said. "Tell me the truth for once." He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "We were drowning. The business was failing, the bank was calling every week. Your mother said the Lawrences could save us. She said Adam would invest, but only if we put Lila's name on everything. I didn't want to, but—" He stopped, voice cracking. "I didn't want to lose the house. So you lost me instead." He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words died in his throat. That was when she appeared. My mother's voice cut through the sound of rain against the windows. "There you are." She stood in the doorway, her umbrella still dripping. Her tone was light, almost cheerful. "I see you've been visiting all our old haunts, Madeline. Digging up the past won't change anything." I turned toward her. "No, but it will expose everything you've buried." She tilted her head. "Always so dramatic. You think this is some kind of betrayal, families do what they must to survive." "You didn't save the family," I said. "You sold it." Her eyes flashed. "I protected your father's reputation. I kept this business from collapsing. You should be grateful." "Grateful," I said. "For being erased." She stepped closer, her perfume sharp and familiar. "You've always been so ungrateful. You have your independence, your job, your fancy apartment. What more do you need?" "The truth," she laughed softly. "The truth is overrated." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was David. I stepped aside and answered. "Madeline," he said, his voice low. "I just got the corporate filings from the state. They forged your signature on the merger contract. It's official, you were listed as a consenting shareholder." My stomach dropped. They forged my signature, yes. We can prove it. The handwriting doesn't match. I'm emailing the documents now. I hung up staring at my mother. You forged my name. Her expression didn't change. You're exaggerating. You used my identity to make this legal, I said. You committed fraud. She smoothed her hair. Big words, darling. You sound just like that lawyer of yours. My voice shook. You're going to lose everything. She smiled, a thin, cold smile that made my skin crawl. Then at least we'll lose it beautifully. I walked past her without another word. Outside, the rain had turned to sheets, soaking through my coat in seconds. I didn't care. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my car keys. When I reached the driver's seat, another message from David flashed across the screen. We have enough to file. Call me tonight. I looked back through the windshield. My mother stood under her umbrella watching me drive away, her face calm, unflinching. For a moment, I saw the woman who used to tuck me in at night, who'd kissed my forehead and promised family always protects its own. But that promise was gone, washed away like the name on the building behind her. As I pulled onto the main road, I whispered, You taught me loyalty. Now I'll teach you consequence. The rain blurred the road ahead, but I didn't slow down. The invitation came from Aunt Anne the next morning, her voice soft and careful on the phone, like she was talking to someone standing on the edge of a cliff. Your parents are coming to dinner tomorrow, she said. So is Lila. They're saying it's time the family sat down and talked. I laughed quietly. Talk. That's rich. Madeline, she said gently, maybe it's a chance to clear the air before it gets worse. It's already worse, I said. They just don't know it yet. The line went silent for a moment, and then she said, Then maybe it's time they did. I hung up and stared out my apartment window. The city below looked small, distant, like a snow globe someone had shaken too hard. The light from the street lamps bled into the early dusk, and for the first time since this began, I felt a strange calm. Tomorrow there would be no more pretending. By Saturday evening, I was on the road to Camden again, a folder of documents on the passenger seat. The air smelled of pine and salt, the sky bruised with rain clouds that hadn't quite decided whether to break. Aunt Anne's house sat at the end of a narrow lane overlooking the lake. It was always where family gatherings happened, the neutral ground when everyone else was too angry to host. When I walked in, the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the house. The fire crackled softly, and the table was already set for 8. My parents sat on one side, dressed like they were attending a country club dinner rather than an ambush of their own making. Lila and Adam sat next to them, whispering. Aunt Anne hovered near the kitchen doorway, worry etched into every line of her face. Madeline, my mother said with a tight smile. You made it. Of course, I said. Wouldn't want to miss a family reunion. The silence that followed was the kind you could feel on your skin. My father cleared his throat, gesturing toward a chair. Sit down. Let's not make this more difficult than it already is. I sat, setting the folder down beside my plate. Lila tried to smile, but it looked fragile, the kind of expression people wear when they already know they're on the losing side. Mom was the first to speak. We've all said and done things we regret, she began, her tone measured. But dragging our private matters into court isn't the answer. You could ruin us, Madeline. I looked at her across the table. I'm not the one who forged signatures and stole a company. Her jaw tightened. That's a very harsh way of putting it. It's an accurate way, I said. Dad set down his glass with a sharp click. We're still your parents. You could show a little respect. Respect is earned, I said quietly. You lost it when you decided my name was negotiable. Lila reached for her water glass, voice trembling. Can we not do this now? Aunt Anne's trying to help. Maybe we can find a solution. I turned to her. You want a solution? Start by admitting what you signed. Her face drained of color. I didn't know it was fraud. Mom sighed. It wasn't fraud. It was estate planning. You're twisting everything to make us look like villains. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table like a dealer laying down cards. These emails say otherwise. Payments from Lawrence Holdings to Victor Langley. Transfers from the company account to Lila. Handwritten notes from Dad about the merger timeline. You didn't plan for the family, you planned for yourselves. Dad's face flushed red. Where did you get those? Does it matter, I said. The point is I have them, and soon so will the court. For a moment no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the slow crackle of the fire. Then Mom laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. You think you've won something by airing our dirty laundry? You'll destroy us all. I met her eyes. No, Mom. You destroyed us when you stood at that wedding and said you had one daughter. Her smile faltered, the mask slipping. That was a mistake. You're blowing it out of proportion. It was the truth, I said. For you, at least. Aunt Anne stepped forward, her voice steady. Enough. This isn't helping anyone. Evelyn, you need to listen to her. Mom glared at her sister. Stay out of this, Anne. No, Aunt Anne said firmly. I won't. I watched you take from that girl for years. I watched her keep this family afloat while you smiled like nothing was wrong. You don't get to rewrite the story now. Dad's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his glass again. We didn't mean to hurt her. But you did, Aunt Anne said. And now you need to own it. Lila started crying softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want any of this. I thought it would bring us closer. I looked at her, feeling something close to pity. You can't build closeness on lies, Lila. It collapses eventually. Adam shifted uncomfortably beside her but said nothing. His silence told me everything I needed to know. He was here for damage control, not redemption. Mom stood abruptly. This is absurd. You all sound like children. Madeline, you can't sue your own family. I stood too. I can when they commit fraud. Her eyes flashed with something between fear and fury. Do you have any idea what this will do to your father's health? To our reputation? I don't care about your reputation, I said. You cared about it enough for all of us. Dad's voice broke through the tension, low and weary. It wasn't supposed to go this way. I thought the house would make things easier. Easier for who, I asked. For Lila. For you. Because all it did was show me exactly where I stand. Mom's face softened slightly. You're still our daughter. No, I said. I'm your mistake that learned to speak. The words hung heavy in the air. Aunt Anne covered her mouth, eyes glistening. Lila looked down, shaking her head, tears slipping silently onto the tablecloth. Dad pushed back his chair and stood, his voice cracking. We just wanted to keep the family together. I met his gaze. You can't keep something together by pretending it's not broken. For a long moment, no one moved. The storm outside finally broke, rain hammering against the windows. Mom stood there staring at the papers on the table, her hand trembling slightly. This will ruin us, she whispered. I gathered the documents and slid them back into the folder. No, Mom, I said quietly. It'll save me. I turned toward the door, but before I could leave, Aunt Anne caught my arm. Her voice was low, steady. That took courage, she said. I knotted my throat tight. It shouldn't have had to. When I stepped outside, the rain hit my face like ice, but it felt clean, freeing. Behind me, the argument began again, my mother's voice sharp, my father's softer, broken. Lila's crying filled the spaces between their words. I walked down the path to my car, lightning flashing across the lake. My phone buzzed with a message from David. The media got wind of the case. Expect calls tomorrow. I typed back, let them talk. The truth deserves an audience. As I started the engine, I glanced once more at the house. Through the window, I could see Aunt Anne standing over my mother, her face pale but resolute. They built their empire on silence, I whispered. Now it's time the silence burns. I pulled away from the house, the rain blurring the road ahead, but I didn't slow down. The story broke 2 days later. My phone started vibrating before sunrise, lighting up with notifications from numbers I didn't recognize. By the time I opened my email, the subject lines told me everything. Local designer faces family fraud allegations. Grant family business. Under investigation. Sister's lawsuit sparks feud in prominent Camden family. The world I'd grown up in, the careful, curated image of respectability my parents had built, was cracking in public. And somehow that made it worse for them than losing money ever could. When I got to work, even my assistant couldn't meet my eyes. "You're trending on Reddit," she said softly. "Someone leaked the court filings." I didn't need to ask who. There were only a handful of people who had access, and none of them were strangers to manipulation. David called within minutes. "Don't respond to anyone," he said. "No interviews, no statements. Let the documents speak for themselves." "They already are," I said. "And everyone's listening." He hesitated. "You're not safe in Camden right now. The Lawrences are panicking and your family's trying to control the narrative. Stay in Boston until we get the injunction approved." But I couldn't. Because the longer they spun their version of the story, the easier it became for people to believe it. That afternoon, I drove to Camden. The town felt smaller, tighter, like everyone was whispering behind windows. As I passed the coffee shop near the harbor, I saw Mrs. Keene, my mother's old friend, watching me from inside. When our eyes met, she looked away, pretending to be fascinated by her pastry. Outside Grant Interiors, a small crowd had gathered. The new sign gleamed in the sunlight, but the reporters out front made it look like a crime scene. "Miss Grant, do you have any comment about the allegations? Did your family really forge your signature? Is it true your parents transferred assets to your sister to avoid inheritance claims?" Their voices blended into a single suffocating hum. Cameras flashed. I kept walking. Inside the showroom was eerily quiet. The front desk was empty, the lights dimmed. Then I saw her, my mother, standing by the display window, her reflection fractured in the glass. "You shouldn't have come," she said without turning. "I had to," I said. "You've been talking to the press." Her shoulders stiffened. "Someone has to tell the truth." I laughed softly. "You mean your version of it?" She turned then, eyes sharp. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? People are calling from the country club, from the church. Your father can't even show his face at Home Depot without whispers. Lila's children are being teased at school. They shouldn't have built their lives on lies," I said. "Lies," she echoed. "You've humiliated us, Madeline." "Over what money?" "It was never about money," I said. "It was about respect, about honesty." "Honesty doesn't pay the bills," she snapped. "Do you think any of this was easy for us? We were drowning, and you—" "I was saving you," I interrupted. "Every check I wrote, every overtime shift I took, it was for this family. And you turned me into a ghost at my own sister's wedding." Her expression faltered for the first time. "We made a mistake." "No," I said. "You made a choice." Behind her, the door opened. My father stepped in, his face pale, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Enough," he said quietly. "We can't keep fighting like this." Mom's voice wavered. "She's destroying us, Robert." He looked at me. "Maybe we did that ourselves." For a moment, I saw something human in him again. Regret, maybe. But it didn't last. He straightened his shoulders. "You need to drop the case, Madeline. The lawyers are saying if you push this any further, the business will collapse completely." "It already has," I said. "You just can't admit it." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. The Lawrences are threatening to sue. They'll come after everything, our house, our savings, Lila's share." "Then let them," I said. "You should have thought of that before signing my name." His eyes widened. "You think this will make you happy, watching your family fall apart?" "No," I said. "It'll make me free." He flinched like I'd hit him. My mother turned away, staring out at the street where the reporters waited. "You've always been so cold," she whispered. "So unyielding. You got that from me." Her admission surprised me more than her insults ever could. Dad moved closer, his voice lower now. "You can still fix this. Withdraw the complaint. We'll sign over part of the company to you quietly. No one needs to know." I stared at him. "You think I'm negotiating? Everyone has a price," he said. "Not me," I said. "Not anymore." I turned and walked out before they could respond. Outside, the reporters surged forward again, shouting questions. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept walking until I reached my car. By the time I got back to Boston, the news cycle had already moved to phase 2 expert opinions, op-eds about family greed talk show hosts, debating whether I was justified. My inbox was full of strangers, some sympathetic, others calling me ungrateful. That night, David came by my apartment with takeout and a printed copy of the injunction. "It's filed," he said. "The assets are frozen until the court hearing next month." I took the papers, my hands shaking slightly. "So it's official. Official enough to make them sweat," he said. I set the document down on the table and stared at it. "You ever get tired of being right?" He smiled faintly. "Only when it hurts this much to be." We ate in silence for a while, the city lights flickering through the window. "You know they'll call," he said eventually. "Begging, threatening, maybe both." "I won't answer." "You say that now," he said. "But guilt is a tricky thing." I looked at him. "So is justice." That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm outside beat against the glass, steady and relentless. I kept thinking about Lila's kids, about Emma and Tyler, how innocent they were in all this. They didn't choose deceit, they just inherited it. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but you don't know what Adam's capable of." I stared at it, heart pounding. Then another came seconds later. "Back off before someone gets hurt." The air in the room seemed to thin. I took a screenshot and sent it to David. "Guess who's playing dirty now?" he called immediately. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock your doors. I'll call the police in Camden." I hung up and double-checked every window, every latch. My pulse refused to settle. When the apartment finally went quiet again, I sank onto the couch, the document folder still on the table in front of me. Through the glass, lightning flashed over the skyline. I whispered to myself, "You can't scare me anymore." But deep down, I wasn't sure if I believed it. The next morning, I found an envelope wedged under my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a photo of me taken outside the courthouse 2 days ago, printed on cheap paper. On the back in block letters, it read, "Drop the case." I sat on the floor holding it with trembling fingers. They were getting desperate. And desperate people made dangerous mistakes. By the time David arrived with the police report, I had already decided what came next. "We're not backing down," I said. "If they want a war, they're about to find out who they underestimated." He nodded. Then we hit back harder. I looked at the rain streaking down the window, my reflection faint against the gray. My mother had once said families survive on sacrifice. Maybe she was right. Maybe the sacrifice was me. But not anymore. This time, it would be their turn to bleed for what they built. The police officer who came to take my statement looked barely old enough to shave. He flipped through his notepad like this was just another petty harassment case, not a threat that had my entire family unraveling. "You said you received a photograph under your door," he asked, his pen scratching slowly across the paper. "Yes," I said, setting the envelope on the table between us. "And 2 text messages before that. Anonymous number." The tone wasn't subtle. He glanced at the photo, frowning. "Anyone come to mind who might want to intimidate you?" I almost laughed. "How much time do you have?" He smiled politely, not catching the sarcasm. "We'll run the number. Most of the time these things come from burners, nothing traceable. But we'll do our best." His best didn't sound reassuring. After he left, David stood by the window, arms crossed, staring down at the rainy street. "This is escalation," he said quietly. "Which means someone's scared." "Adam," I said without hesitation. "He's the only one with that kind of arrogance. My parents wouldn't send threats, they manipulate, not intimidate." David nodded. "Then he just made his first mistake. People like him get reckless when they lose control." I sank onto the couch, exhaustion pressing down like gravity. "What now?" "Now," he said, "we tighten security, document everything, and wait for the court date. The injunction gives us leverage. We don't need to provoke them." But patience had never been my strength. That evening, as thunder rolled over Boston, I opened my laptop and started digging. Lawrence Holdings was a fortress of shell companies and real estate ventures, but there was one division that caught my eye, LH Construction. It had been losing money for 2 consecutive years, hemorrhaging cash into consulting fees and acquisition costs, the same language that had appeared in my family's bank records. It wasn't hard to see the pattern. Adam had used my parents' company as collateral to cover his failing projects. When the merger happened, he didn't just gain control of Grant Interiors. He gained access to my money. At midnight, I sent David an email with the subject line, "He's laundering funds through the merger." He called within minutes. "Are you sure almost?" "The accounts line up too perfectly to be coincidence. He's hiding debt under the name of the new company." David exhaled. "If that's true, this case just went from family dispute to corporate fraud." I rubbed my temples. "And if it's not, then we make damn sure it becomes one," he said. The next morning, the news got worse. Aunt Anne called, her voice trembling. "Madeline, your father collapsed last night. They took him to street. Luke's." I went still. He's stable," she said quickly. "But it's bad. You should come." I didn't want to. Some part of me hated that I still cared that the same man who had looked me in the eye and told me to drop my case could still pull me home with one phone call. But there was no choice. When I walked into the hospital room, the beeping machines filled the silence that words couldn't. My father looked small against the white sheets, oxygen tubes looping around his face. Mom sat beside him, her makeup smudged, her eyes hollow. Lila was pacing near the window, clutching a phone she wasn't really using. When she saw me, she froze. "You came." "I did," I said quietly. "How is he?" Mom's voice was brittle. "A minor heart attack. The doctors said stress was a factor." Her gaze cut into me sharp as glass. "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare blame this on me." Lila turned, her voice trembling. "He's scared, Maddie. He thinks you're trying to destroy us." "I'm trying to stop the lies," I said. "If that destroys what's left, that's on him." Mom stood suddenly, her voice rising. "You've turned this family into a spectacle. Reporters outside the house. Our names and headlines. Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" I stared at her, something inside me going still. "Everything you did was hidden behind closed doors for years." "I didn't ruin the family, Mom. I just turned on the light." She flinched but said nothing. Dad stirred slightly, opening his eyes. "Madeline," he whispered, his voice weak. "You came." I stepped closer, my anger softening just a little. "Yeah, I came." He reached for my hand. His grip was fragile, trembling. "Your mother, she was just trying to protect us." I swallowed hard. "From what accountability? She's strong," he murmured, fading again. "Stronger than you think." I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. A nurse came in and ushered us out gently, saying he needed rest. Outside the room, Lila caught my arm. "Maddie, please. Maybe this is a sign. Maybe it's time to stop." I looked at her, seeing the same pleading I'd seen since we were kids when she wanted me to clean up her messes. "I stopped once," I said. "And look what it cost me." I walked away before she could answer. That night I stayed at a small motel near the harbor. The walls were thin, the air heavy, with the smell of rain and cheap detergent. I couldn't sleep, so I opened my laptop again. The bank records David had sent glowed on the screen. Transfers between Lawrence Holdings and offshore accounts, numbers that didn't add up. Then in one column, a notation caught my eye: LH, divided by Grant Equipment Liquidation Fund. A series of payments made out to a name I didn't recognize: Daniel Strauss. I called David immediately. "Who's Daniel Strauss?" He sounded half asleep. "Why, he's on the books. Large transfers, hundreds of thousands through the merger accounts." David was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Madeline, that's Adam's CFO. He was fired last week." No explanation. Where is he now? I don't know. But if he's smart, he's sitting on evidence. I closed my laptop slowly. Then we find him. The next day, David used his contacts to track Strauss down. He was living in a rented condo on the outskirts of Portland, and after a few calls, he agreed to meet. He wants immunity, David said. He says what he knows could burn everyone. When we arrived, Strauss looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His hands shook as he poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "You're the sister," he said. "The one they cut out." "That's me," I said. "What do you know about the merger?" He laughed bitterly. "Everything. Adam's been using your family's business to wash construction losses for years. The merger was his way to bury it all. Your parents went along because they thought it was a rescue. But he used your money every cent to cover his debts. That's why the Lawrence accounts were always flush. They weren't earning, they were stealing." David leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" Strauss nodded and slid a flash drive across the table. Emails, bank transfers, invoices, all of it. Adam even forged state documents to move funds offshore. My heart hammered in my chest. "Why are you helping us?" He gave a hollow smile. "Because I'm tired of cleaning up his messes, and because I know how he reacts when cornered. You're going to need protection." When we left, David locked the drive in his briefcase. "This is the smoking gun," he said. "If even half of what's on here checks out, the Lawrences are done." As we stepped outside, the wind howled across the empty parking lot, carrying the smell of rain and ocean salt. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "He's not going to go down quietly." David nodded. "No, but neither are you." That night, I drove back toward Boston, my mind spinning with everything Strauss had said. My father's tired voice, my mother's denial, the flash drive heavy in David's briefcase. It all blended into one relentless thought. They had built their empire on my silence, and now I was going to dismantle it piece by piece. As I crossed the city line, my phone buzzed with a new message. No number. Just one sentence. "You should have stayed gone, Madeline." I stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "You should have known better than to make me come back." The morning after meeting Strauss, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating non-stop. My email inbox was flooding with notifications from news outlets and bloggers. Someone had leaked the investigation summary David filed late last night, names, amounts, everything. Lawrence Holdings, Grant Interiors, and my family were all over the headlines now. The top story read, "Camden designer family accused of financial conspiracy, daughter blows whistle on $2 million fraud scheme." Underneath was a photo of me leaving the courthouse, mid-step, raincoat clinging to my frame. I looked like someone who'd already burned down her world and wasn't sure what came next. David called before I even had a chance to finish the article. "It wasn't me," he said before I could speak. "But the leak might help us. Public pressure means the state investigators will move faster. Or it'll make Adam desperate," I said, staring at the screen. "And desperate men are dangerous." He didn't disagree. "Just stay put, Maddie. The fraud task force will subpoena the Lawrences within the week. We're close now. Close." The word didn't feel like comfort, it felt like a warning. By noon, there were reporters outside my apartment building again. I turned off my phone, packed a small bag, and drove north toward the coast. I didn't tell David where I was going, but I knew I needed space to think away from headlines and court filings, and the smell of betrayal that clung to everything in my life lately. I ended up at my father's cabin near Boothbay Harbor. It had been our refuge, once a weathered little place surrounded by pines overlooking the gray Atlantic. He used to bring me here after long weeks at the shop, teaching me how to sand wood and read the tides. Back then, life felt simple, honest. Now even the sea looked guilty. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Dust floated in the air like old memories. The air smelled faintly of salt and cedar. Everything was just as he'd left it, the same checkered blanket over the couch, the same cracked coffee mug on the counter. I was still standing there when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. My body went cold. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Then the door opened and Lila stepped in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked pale, her hair pulled back, eyes red from crying. "I figured you'd come here," she said softly. "You always run to the ocean when you need to think." I kept my voice steady. "You shouldn't be here. I had to talk to you." "About what?" Damage control. Her chin trembled. "About Dad." My stomach tightened. What about him? She hesitated. He knows. About Strauss, the flash drive, all of it, Adam told him last night. How does Adam even? I stopped. Of course. He's monitoring everything. Go on. Dad's terrified, she said. Mom's in denial. Adam's furious. He says if you don't drop the case, he'll drag you down with him. I laughed, sharp and humorless. That's his best strategy. Threaten the person who has nothing left to lose. Maddie, please, she said. This isn't just business anymore. Adam's not stable. He's been drinking, calling lawyers, talking about moving money offshore before the injunction hits. Good, I said. Let him dig his own grave faster. She took a step closer. He said something else. Something about Dad's old accounts, how your money wasn't the only thing he used. He said there's more at stake than you realize. My pulse quickened. What does that mean? She shook her head. I don't know. But Dad looked terrified when he said it. I turned toward the window, watching waves crash against the rocks below. He's hiding something. Maybe that's why he collapsed. Lila's voice softened. You don't have to keep fighting, Maddie. You've already proven your point. I looked back at her, and for the first time in a long while, I saw not my rival or my mother's favorite, but my sister, the girl who used to sneak into my bed during storms and whisper secrets under the covers. It's not about proving anything, I said quietly. It's about ending it. Tears filled her eyes. You're becoming just like them. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll sleep at night. She turned away, shaking her head. Adam won't stop. Please be careful. She left a few minutes later, the sound of her car fading into the distance. I stayed by the window long after watching the tide drag debris across the shore. There was a storm brewing, literal and otherwise. At dusk, I lit a fire and poured myself a glass of whiskey from the old bottle Dad kept under the sink. The first sip burned all the way down, grounding me. I took out my phone, scrolling through messages I hadn't read. Among them was one from David, timestamped an hour earlier. Call me as soon as possible. Urgent. When I called, his voice was tense. We've got a problem. Strauss is missing. I sat up straight. What do you mean missing? His condo was broken into this afternoon. Laptops gone, flash drives gone. Neighbors said they saw a black SUV around noon. No plates. My heart pounded. The files, did you back them up? I did, he said. But they'll assume I didn't. Which means, you're next on their list. I looked at the dark window, my reflection flickering in the firelight. Let them come, I said. I'm done hiding. David swore under his breath. You don't get it. These aren't people who lose gracefully. I'll send someone to stay with you tonight. I'll be fine. Madeline, he said, voice sharp now. Lock your doors. Promise me. I promise, I said. But when I hung up, I didn't move. Hours passed. The fire dimmed, the wind howled against the cabin. Then, somewhere outside, I heard a car door slam. Every muscle in my body went still. I turned off the lamp, heart hammering. Through the thin curtains, I saw headlights flash once, then go dark. Footsteps crunched on gravel. I grabbed the fire poker, moving silently toward the window. The front porch creaked. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They were confident. A shadow passed the glass. Then 3 slow knocks echoed through the door. Who is it? I called, my voice steadier than I felt. No answer. Another knock, harder this time. I inched closer to the peephole. The porch light flickered, casting a half-lit view of a man's outline. He wasn't Adam. He wasn't my father. He was someone I didn't recognize, tall, wearing a hooded jacket. Go away, I said. The man leaned closer to the door. His voice was low, almost polite. Miss Grant, I have a message. From who? From someone who thinks you've made a very dangerous mistake. My throat tightened. Tell him I'm not done making them, he chuckled softly. Suit yourself. Then the footsteps receded. A car engine started. Headlights swept across the trees before vanishing down the road. I stayed frozen for several minutes, the fire poker still in my hand, before finally locking every window and door in the cabin. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. David answered on the first ring. What happened? Someone was here, I whispered. They knew my name. Get out of there, he said. Right now. I can't. It's late, and the roads are flooded. He cursed under his breath. I'm sending a patrol car. Stay inside. Don't open that door for anyone. I ended the call and sank onto the couch, staring at the flames as they slowly died down. Outside, the storm hit full-force wind howling through the trees. Somewhere deep inside, fear twisted into resolve. They thought they could scare me into silence. They thought I'd back down the way my parents always did. But they'd underestimated me. The next morning, the police found fresh tire tracks near the cabin, leading toward the old highway. No fingerprints, no plates, no trace of who had come. But I didn't need proof anymore. The warning had told me everything I needed to know. The Lawrences were desperate, and desperate meant sloppy. I stared at the ocean beyond the pines, waves breaking violently against the rocks, and whispered, "You wanted a war, Adam. Now you've got one." By the time I drove back to Boston, the city felt like a different world. The morning sky was brittle blue, and the air had that raw chill that always came before spring. I hadn't slept. My head was pounding, my thoughts still looping around the knock on the cabin door and the man's voice saying I'd made a dangerous mistake. David met me at his office before I even called. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "You scared the hell out of me," he said as soon as I walked in. "Do you have any idea how bad this could have gone? I'm still standing," I said. "That's not the point." He rubbed his temples. "I filed a motion this morning to put the case under federal jurisdiction. Once the feds are involved, you'll have protection. But you need to lay low." "Laying low isn't exactly my specialty," I said, dropping my coat on the chair. Clearly, he handed me a coffee and a folder. "You need to see this." The financial task force traced a series of offshore transfers tied to the merger. The final recipient, a Cayman Islands account under Adam Lawrence's name. I felt a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. So it's confirmed. Money laundering. "Yeah," David said grimly. "And your parents' signatures are on 3 of the authorizations." I exhaled, staring at the papers. They really signed everything he put in front of them. They trusted him, David said. Or maybe they were too scared to lose him. I shook my head. No. They weren't scared of losing him. They were scared of losing what he made them look like. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then swore softly. That was Detective Harris. They found Strauss, alive, but barely. By the time we reached the hospital, the place was crawling with law enforcement. Strauss had been found unconscious in his car outside a rest stop north of Portland. Carbon monoxide poisoning, the report said. They were calling it an attempted suicide, but David's face told me he didn't buy it. In the ICU, Strauss looked ghostly, pale tubes running from his arms. When he opened his eyes and saw me, his expression shifted from confusion to dread. Don't talk, David said gently. You're safe now. Strauss's voice was barely a whisper. They knew about the flash drive, about the emails. David leaned in. Who? Strauss swallowed hard. Adam. And your father, he told him where to find me. My chest tightened. My father, Strauss's eyes flickered toward me. He said he just wanted to fix it. Said Adam would make it right. I didn't know they'd try to kill me. The monitor beside him beeped faster. A nurse stepped in, motioning for us to leave. Out in the hallway, David's expression was grim. If Strauss is telling the truth, this isn't just fraud anymore. It's criminal conspiracy and attempted murder. I felt numb. My father wouldn't, but I stopped myself. I'd said those words too many times before. David's phone buzzed again. Another call. Another piece of bad news. The Lawrences are cleaning house. Their offices are being emptied as we speak. If they move the assets out of state, we'll lose jurisdiction. I didn't even think. Then we stopped them. Madeline, that's not your job. Let law enforcement handle this. I've trusted other people to handle it my whole life, I said. Look where that got me. That night I drove to Camden again. The streets were quiet, washed in moonlight. I parked outside Grant Interiors and watched the lights flicker in the showroom windows. My mother's car was there, so was Adam's. I walked up the path, each step fueled by something deeper than anger resolve. When I opened the door, their voices hit me first. "You said this would stay private," Mom hissed. Adam's voice was steady but cold. "I said I'd contain it. I didn't promise miracles." "You forged her name," Dad snapped. "We trusted you," Adam laughed softly. "You trusted me because I'm competent, Robert. Because you were drowning. Don't start pretending you didn't know how deep the water was." I stepped into the room. "Then maybe it's time we all stop pretending." They froze. My mother's hand flew to her chest. "Madeline, don't," I said. "Don't say my name like it still means something to you." Adam turned, eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you," I said. "But here we are." Dad looked exhausted, older than I'd ever seen him. "Maddie, please. This isn't what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like," I said, holding up my phone. "I have Strauss's statement. The police know about the attempt on his life. You think they won't connect that to the people who had the most to lose?" Adam smirked. "You really think I'd leave fingerprints?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "But you left a trail of money, and that's harder to wash off." He took a step forward, his tone dropping to a low hiss. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," I said, "I finally do." Before he could respond, red and blue lights flashed outside the window. The sirens cut through the night, sharp and final. David had followed me, and he'd brought backup. Police stormed in within seconds, the air filling with orders and the sound of shuffling feet. Adam raised his hands, laughing like this was some elaborate misunderstanding. My mother started crying. My father just sat down, his shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. Detective Harris read out the charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, attempted manslaughter. I watched Adam's smirk fade when they said no bail. As they led him away, he glanced back at me. "You think this ends with me?" he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Your family was never innocent." When the door shut behind him, the room went eerily quiet. Mom reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said again. Her voice broke. "I didn't know what he was doing. I just wanted to protect your father." "You protected your image," I said softly, "and you lost everything else." Dad looked up at me then, tears glinting under the harsh fluorescent light. "I'm sorry, Maddie. I really am. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to forgive him. But all I could feel was the weight of 8 years of lies pressing against my ribs." David appeared beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he said. But it didn't feel over. It felt hollow, like the aftermath of a fire, everything still smoking but the flames already gone. The next morning I woke to the news that Adam had confessed. Not everything, not the full scope of the laundering, but enough to implicate my parents and save himself from a lifetime sentence. The Lawrence's empire collapsed overnight. Their accounts frozen, their offices sealed. My parents were released pending trial, but their reputations were destroyed. Camden turned on them fast. The same people who'd toasted their success at Lila's wedding now whispered behind their backs at the grocery store. Lila called me that afternoon. "They're moving out of the house," she said quietly. "Mom can't stand the reporters. Dad's talking about selling." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Was it worth it?" she asked, after a long pause. I looked out the window, the Boston skyline stretching beyond the Charles River. "Ask me when I can breathe again," I said. When I hung up, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, my phone was silent. No missed calls, no frantic messages, no one asking for money. Just silence. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like freedom, and it was heavier than I'd imagined. That evening, David came by with takeout again. "They're calling you a whistleblower now," he said, handing me the bag. "Some are even saying hero." I smiled faintly. "You think I look like a hero?" he shrugged. "I think you look like someone who survived." We ate quietly, watching the city lights flicker against the windows. When he left, I stood on my balcony for a long time, the cold wind biting at my skin. Down below, Boston moved on, cars, lights, laughter. The world didn't stop just because mine had burned down. For the first time, I was okay with that. A year later, spring returned to Boston like an apology, soft light through open windows, the smell of lilacs from the park below, and the kind of quiet that doesn't demand explanation. I woke before sunrise most mornings. Now, not because of anxiety, but because peace had become a habit. The world felt different when it wasn't built around fixing other people's messes. I stood on my balcony with a mug of coffee watching the city wake up. The news had finally stopped mentioning my name months ago. The trial had ended with guilty pleas from Adam and a negotiated settlement from my parents. They avoided prison but lost almost everything: business, house, reputation. Grant Interiors was liquidated. The proceeds went toward repaying defrauded investors. The house on Lighthouse Road was auctioned off to strangers who probably thought it was just another charming coastal home. I hadn't seen my parents since the sentencing. The last image I had of them was in the courthouse hallway, Mom gripping her purse like a shield, Dad staring at the floor, both pretending they weren't the kind of people who'd end up there. Lila had stood between them, crying quietly, but she didn't call after. Not for months. Then 3 weeks ago she did. It was late at night. She said the kids were doing better, that Emma had joined the science club at school, and Tyler was finally sleeping through the night again. She told me Mom and Dad were living in a small rental near Augusta, keeping to themselves. You should visit, she'd said softly. Dad's not well. He keeps asking if you'll ever forgive him. Forgive. The word had sat heavy in my chest ever since. I took a sip of coffee, trying to imagine what forgiveness even looked like now. Maybe it wasn't a conversation or a grand gesture. Maybe it was just letting the past stop feeling like quicksand. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from David. Lunch today, I'm near the courthouse. Your favorite Thai place. I smiled. A year ago, our conversations had been about legal strategy, deadlines, and evidence. Now they were about travel plans and restaurant recommendations. He'd become the only person in my life who'd seen every version of me. The daughter, the whistleblower, the wreck, and somehow still treated me like I hadn't shattered along the way. Meet you there at 1, I typed back. Before heading out, I glanced around my apartment. It looked different these days. Plants by the window, framed photos from hikes and work events, little signs of life I'd ignored before. On my desk sat the plaque my company had given me last month, Excellence in Corporate Ethics and Compliance. It was ironic, maybe poetic, that the girl whose family once built lies into blueprints now lectured Fortune 500 companies on transparency. At the restaurant, David was already seated, scrolling through his phone. When he saw me, he stood with that quiet, easy smile that had once belonged only to colleagues, but now belonged to something deeper. You look rested, he said. I sleep now, I said, sliding into the booth. It's my new thing, he grinned. You deserve it. We talked about work, travel, small things, normal things. The kind of conversation that doesn't orbit around disaster. But halfway through lunch, his tone shifted. I got an email from Lila, he said. I looked up. You did, he nodded. She wanted to know if I'd pass along a message. Your father's condition is worse. Heart failure. The doctors don't think he has much time. The fork paused in my hand. When she didn't say, soon. The noise of the restaurant blurred around me, the clinking of dishes, the murmur of conversations, the steady hum of life continuing. I felt like I was watching it all from behind glass. David reached across the table. You don't have to go, he said gently. You owe them nothing. I stared at the condensation sliding down my water glass. Maybe not. But I owe myself an ending. 2 days later, I drove to Augusta. The highway was quiet, bordered by pines just beginning to show their first hints of green. I hadn't been back to Maine since the trial. Every mile felt like walking backward through time. Their new place was a modest one-story rental near a retirement community. I parked across the street and sat for a moment watching the curtains flutter. When I finally knocked, it was Mom who opened the door. She looked smaller somehow. The woman who'd once commanded every room now stood in front of me wearing a faded sweater. Her hair unstyled, her eyes tired but clear. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, You came. I nodded. Lila called. Her lip trembled. He's been asking for you. Inside the house smelled like chamomile tea and antiseptic. Dad was in a recliner by the window, a blanket over his knees, an oxygen machine humming beside him. He turned his head when he heard me and tried to smile. Maddie, he said softly, you look good. I swallowed the lump in my throat. So do you. It wasn't true, but it felt necessary. He gestured weakly toward the chair beside him. Sit. I did. The silence between us was fragile, heavy with everything we'd never said. Finally, he whispered, I didn't know how to stop it. Your mother, she said it was temporary. That Adam would fix everything. I know, I said. He nodded slowly. I should have protected you. A tear slid down his cheek and that broke something in me. I reached for his hand, thin, cool, trembling, and held it. You did the best you could, I said. I just wish your best hadn't hurt so much. He tried to smile again. You're stronger than I ever was. For the first time, I believed him. He passed 2 weeks later. Lila called me in the middle of the night, her voice raw and broken. I drove up the next morning, arriving just as the hospice van pulled away. Mom was on the porch, staring out at the empty road. When she saw me, she didn't speak. She just stepped forward and hugged me, the kind of hug that said everything words couldn't fix. At the small memorial a few days later, there were no reporters, no lawyers, no whispers about scandal. Just family. Lila spoke first, her voice shaking as she talked about Dad teaching us to build things, to keep our hands busy when our hearts hurt. When it was my turn, I said only one thing. He taught me how to recognize the weight of wood, the worth of work, and the danger of silence. I finally learned to listen. Afterward, I walked alone to the edge of the cemetery, the spring wind tugging at my hair. The sky was clear, impossibly blue. For the first time, the ache in my chest didn't feel like grief, it felt like release. That night back in Boston, I sat on my balcony again. The city glowed below me, steady and bright. I poured a glass of wine and raised it toward the skyline. For endings that make room for beginnings, I whispered. My phone buzzed. A message from David. You okay? Yeah, I typed back. Finally. He replied, dinner tomorrow. No work talk. Just us. I smiled. It's a deal. The air smelled like rain and something hopeful. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing a saxophone, the notes drifting up into the night. For once, I didn't think about the past or the numbers or the names I'd lost. I thought about the life I was still building, the one that belonged entirely to me. And as the city lights flickered against the glass, I whispered the truth I'd taken too long to learn. Family doesn't always mean forgiveness, but freedom. Freedom means finally forgiving yourself. If you've ever been the one who held everything together until it broke, tell me your story in the comments. Maybe you'll remind someone that walking away isn't weakness. It's how you make space for your own strength. And if you believe that second chances start with choosing yourself, hit like, subscribe, and stay. There are more stories to tell about what happens after the storm.